I think it's underrated. Way too many people, they get so focused on exercise, even fitness professionals, they get really focused on what their clients are doing with them in the gym and not realizing what your clients are doing the other 23 hours that you don't see them matters just as much, if not more, because the amount of energy you expend just through just activities of daily living really adds up over a day.
It really comes down to what works for you and how better you can adhere to it.
Welcome everyone to a new episode with Astrid, your APD. Today I will be joined by James Krieger. We are going to talk about really interesting things. Why calories are created equal? Good question. The hypothesis of insulin in obesity, the body composition, how to measure it, what is the most ideal way to measure body composition. When it comes to fat loss, what about exercise? What's the role that exercise plays here? For those who don't know you, I know you're very well known in the industry, but you are not that kind of guy that is putting content every single day and you do so many things. So those who might don't know you, why fitness, why nutrition, why research? Who's James Krieger?
Well, yeah, I started years and years ago. Like most guys, I just got into weight training because I was too skinny, and so I just wanted to put on some muscle and stuff. And I was actually a computer science guy at the time, and just was interested in the science behind how my body was changing and stuff. So I ended up kind of just taking the career path and going down that direction, and eventually kind of got into doing research and got really fascinated behind the science of it and ended up making somewhat of a career out of it. So
you have an amazing website where you put a lot of information, free content, and also your research review. So I had the opportunity to take some of the things that you have written over the past few years, and that's what I wanted to ask you today. And one of the topics that you generally talk a lot about is the insulin-related hypothesis model of obesity.
Yeah.
And what is some of these so debated type of things that we talk about around insulin and why it is so badly blamed for obesity when it doesn't have much of a blame. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
yeah, so it appeals to a lot of people because it's a very simple idea. So we know that carbs basically cause insulin release, and we also know that insulin kind of helps kind of shut down fat release from fat cells. So people make the connection that, oh, hey, well, if I eat too many carbs, I won't be able to lose fat. And, and that's really the whole hypothesis in a nutshell. And the thing is, it's an easy hypothesis to test. I mean, all you got to do is, and this has been done a number of times, is, take two groups of people, put them on the same diet in terms of calories, but have one go high carb, the other go low carb, and just make sure calorie content is controlled. And I mean, if the insulin hypothesis was right, the low carb group should lose more fat, but we know that doesn't happen. So we know that the hypothesis is way overly simplistic. It doesn't actually work in the real world. The reason why people some people I'd say do well on low carb is just because, it helps some people eat less is what it comes down to. I mean, it still just comes down, it's just one technique people to eat less, and some people will attribute that to some magical benefit of reducing insulin, which that's really not the case. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Yeah.
When you talk about ketogenic diets or like these low carb diets, and people reporting that they feel that they was more helpful for them, probably it's because I think I tend to attribute it that they were eating less protein, and now they have somehow included more high protein foods, and that makes them feel more satiated overall. And that necessarily need to be related to the high content diet. I don't know. It's a theory I have, but I think. What do you think about the potential shortcomings of the high protein? Is it the high carb? Is it protein? Is it what it is that makes that metabolic advantage?
Yeah, well, I would say there's not a metabolic advantage, but the reason it helps people eat less is, part of it is the protein content. And in fact, there is a study out there where they basically ask the question, well, is it the reduction in carbs or is it the elevation in protein? And I don't remember the authors' names off the top of my head, but they concluded basically it was the elevation in protein that was responsible for the decrease in appetite. Now, there's more to it than that. I mean, typically when someone goes on a low carb diet, they cut out a lot of, they cut out cake and cookies and ice cream and all your high reward foods. And so, of course, those foods are super energy dense and stuff. And again, they're very rewarding and they're easy to overeat. So yeah, when you're going to cut those types of foods out, I mean, you're automatically going to eat less. And then there is one study that showed that being in ketosis does seem to help a little bit with appetite control. What the mechanism is, we don't know. I mean, we do know there's some rodent research showing that ketones seem to have an effect on the brain that maybe reduce appetite, but that effect seems to wane over time. So, someone who first goes on a keto diet, they may get that appetite suppressant effect, but it tends to kind of go away over time. So there's likely a combination of factors at play there. But the bottom line is it's just helping people eat less. But the problem you get is that people see it as the people that end up seeing it as magical, they take it as a license to eat as much fat as they want. And then they go super low carb and suddenly they stop losing weight and they don't know why they're not losing weight because they think, oh, I've reduced my carbs to practically zero and I'm still not losing weight. And well, it still comes down to your energy balance. So.
Absolutely. I agree completely that energy balance is going to be the most important thing at the end of the day, regardless of whether you go high carbs or high fat. But now there is a very controversial topic that I think you hear a lot about, and it's about calories. So when we talk about calories, there's this heated debate on that our calories are not created equal. People say, well, I think people assume that calories are like gremlins or like monsters that they have a personality and they're good or bad. So what is, in your opinion, what is your stance on this topic on all calories are created equal?
So I guess, I mean, the technical answer would be yes, all calories are created equal in the sense that a calorie is just a unit of heat. So it's like a calorie is a calorie in terms of unit of heat or a unit of energy. Now that said, different types of foods can have different impacts on appetite and things. So in that sense, a calorie is not a calorie. I mean, a simple example is there's going to be a big difference in terms of satiety versus when I eat like a lean steak versus ice cream, I mean, and so in that sense, they're not the same, so the impacts on the body aren't the same in terms of the types of foods, but, so that matters in terms of appetite regulation and things like that. But in purely technical terms, a calorie is a calorie because it's just a unit of heat. It's just a unit of energy. That's all it is. So. Yeah,
correct. So like calories are a unit of measurement, but at the end of the day, what we want to really understand is that not food composition and like the nutrient composition is not the same. Yeah. And it's going to be different depending on what is the macronutrient that is predominant in that food that has perhaps a specific effect with the fiber content, with the protein content, and that might affect on satiety or appetite regulation, on different hormonal responses. All of these different things will play a role, obviously. So that is what you would stance on, like calories would be a unit of measurement, but the food composition is what makes it different. So it's not the same.
The food composition, yeah. I mean, it's just, it's how the food composition affects, really what it comes down to is the food composition can impact how much you actually eat, and so that's where it actually matters, and, everything from the types of food processing to the macro content, to the fiber content, to the water content of the food, all those things kind of play with each other and have an impact on how satiating the food is and everything else. So.
Yeah, so like if we were talking about, like if it fits your macros approach where you could fit in whatever you wanted as long as you hit your macros. sometimes you have the downfall that, well, if you're choosing foods that are not satiating enough and you're in a calorie deficit, probably you will not be quite there. You'll struggle because you have more hunger. You're not necessarily managing well your appetite, more cravings. What would you recommend when it comes to choosing a better approach, when it comes to having certain amount of flexibility to allow you for consistency and adherence, but without adding that extra layer of uncertainty, where if you add more foods that perhaps are not going to be nutritious enough or satiating enough, you might get into trouble along the way?
Yeah, I think as long as the majority of your food is coming from, whole foods, low energy density foods, fruits and vegetables, all that stuff, as long as most of it's coming from that, then, having a small percentage from foods that are going to be rewarding or energy dense isn't going to be a problem, and so there's always room for that. Now, obviously, it's going to depend on your situation. A competitor who is, 2 weeks out from a contest and already has super low calories isn't going to have much room for some of those high reward foods. But, a non-competitor, something like that, where your energy deficit isn't very high or you're not super lean, it's incorporating some of the, I don't want to use the term bad foods because I don't like labeling foods good or bad, but maybe saying some of the foods that I would say are lower in quality. There's nothing wrong with having a small portion of that, and if anything, it might make adherence and sustainability easier over the long run versus having like an attitude where, I can't have this at all, which typically tends to make things it tends to, I would say, make you want the food more because you can't have it at all, so.
Yeah, completely agree. I think having that, knowing that you have all the permission to have whatever you want, but obviously you know what your goal is and you decide that whether that's applicable and appropriate to have or not, it is better, and it give you the control and the power to say, well, this is going to really be helpful for me right now, or perhaps it's not helpful because it's not going to help me, and perhaps it's going to make me feel guilty after. So what's the point of having something that I want for feeling better, and then it's not going to really make that outcome. Now, when it comes to body composition, I know you've written a little bit about this. I have a very interesting question. When it comes to these body fat ranges that are displayed and they say, well, this is the ideal body composition ranges for men and this is for women. When we hear these numbers, these ideal body fat ranges, what is the method that is utilized to get these ranges? Because if someone uses the bioimpedance and the others use DEXA, which one is the right tool to use? And when we refer to these ideal numbers, how do I know that I am using the right tool that is correct, aligning to those numbers, these reference numbers?
Yeah, I would say the reference numbers, I really don't know what data they're basing those off of. That said, most body comp methods are fine for group level data for, if you're testing groups of people, let's say I have a group of 50 people and I want to look at what the average body comp for those 50 people are. There's not going to be a huge difference between something like hydrostatic weighing or DEXA or even BIA when I have comparing the averages of the whole group. But it becomes really a problem when you start looking at individuals because the error rate on individuals is so high. I tell people not to bother with body fat testing on an individual level because the number is fairly meaningless, because it's what people need to understand about body comp testing is it's not measuring your body fat. It's measuring something that is related to body fat and then trying to predict what your body fat is based on that measurement. And that prediction has a massive error associated with it. And so even things like DEXA, the things that people think that are really accurate can still be way off. I mean, I've seen really lean competitors come out with DEXA scans that are like, that just seem like you're like, what? How did this person get this percentage? Like, it's just not. That's why I don't like the body fat reference ranges, and I don't like body fat testing in general, other than just for research purposes, for looking at averages. I mean, to me, it's like when it comes to body fat, if you're a competitor, all that matters is how you look on stage anyway. It's not like the judges are looking at a particular body fat percentage, so the number doesn't matter. And if you're not a competitor, again, the number still doesn't matter. It's like, how do you feel? How do your clothes fit? How's your health? Like, how's your blood lipids and things like that? That's the stuff that matters anyway, and not some arbitrary number that isn't necessarily all that accurate in the first place. So that's my opinion on body fat testing.
No, I agree a lot. I think why I ask this question is because people are always trying to look for a reference number to see where they at and perhaps aim for, well, if I am 30% body fat, am I high? Am I low?
Yeah.
Like, is it where I'm at? Like, people are trying to kind of define their state to see whether they need to make any improvements or whether where they're at that point in time is potentially affecting their health somehow.
Yeah. It's really hard to say because I think it's so individual. And I don't even like hard cutoffs anyway, because, let's say the cutoff for someone is 30%. So if you go from 31 to 29, does that necessarily mean you're suddenly okay? Usually those ranges are again, they're meant for kind of general group level areas. I don't know. I have such a hard time answering that question just because I just think it's so individual. And it also just depends on, I mean, for some people, let's say people with obesity and stuff, honestly, BMI works just as well. I mean, I know some in the fitness industry like to poo-poo on BMI because they're like, oh, you could have a football player that shows them as obese. And I'm like, most people don't have that much muscle. Like the vast majority, your average person, BMI works perfectly fine. Like it works perfectly fine. We're not talking about athletes here. We're not talking about, we're just talking about your general pop. And for most people, BMI works perfectly okay with the cutoffs, 30 being obese and, whatever. So, so in that sense, I think, I don't even know if there's a need to do body fat percentage anyway, because like I said, most of your general population are not going to be those special people that have some abnormal amount of muscle where it throws off the BMI, so.
Yeah, I think the other question, why it is people get so fixated on calculating their body fat percentage is because they also want to know how much lean body mass they have. And there are certain prediction equations to get your BMR and your TDEE, and to get those numbers you probably want to use how much lean body mass you have, perhaps to have a little bit more of an accurate number. What is your stance on that, using these type of equations when you obviously are utilizing some level of more in-depth data, like knowing your lean body mass or your potential lean body mass and your fat mass?
Again, for me, for your average person, it's not adding that much information because there's a number of issues. I mean, number one, you have the error in the body comp measurement itself. So you already have a big error there, which is going to throw your lean mass measurement off. The second thing on top of that is now you're using a prediction equation let's say you want to estimate your resting energy expenditure based on lean body mass. Well, that in and of itself is a prediction equation with a big error associated with it. And I would say it's not giving you that much more accuracy as you might think. And I think in practice, I'll even use myself as an example. When I'm trying to, get kind of rough estimates of my energy needs, I don't try to estimate my lean body mass and stuff, because it's not going to improve the accuracy of my prediction enough to make it worthwhile. Like there's too much error anyway, and it all becomes trial and error as it is, because even when you throw the numbers in these equations, it's still a rough estimate, and you're still going to have to make adjustments based on how you respond anyway. So I think people get way too hung up on the numbers. It's like, I just pick something that, is fairly simple to calculate, and with the expectation that you're probably going to have to adjust it up or down anyway, and just go with that. Like, you don't need to go have your body fat tested or have your lean body mass estimated and stuff. Really, the only people who really care about that are researchers who have the tools to do that stuff. But honestly, even with competitors, I don't think it's necessary, because it's all an educated guessing game anyway. So.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. Just pick a number, utilize any prediction equations or whatever, and just have a starting point. At the end of the day, you will have to use that for at least 1 week or 15 days and see where your body weight goes, whether it goes to stay the same, so then you find your maintenance. If it goes down, you lose weight, so then you have to increase a little bit more if you are trying to find that maintenance calories. Or if you go up, perhaps you have to cut out a little bit less of those calories to see whether that adjusts your weight to stabilize it, and then you find your maintenance calories.
Yeah, exactly.
If you were to say, out of all these body composition methods, which one would you say, well, if you're going to have it anyway, better go and use this one, because this might just be the one that might have less error? Or for you would be just choose any and stick with it?
I would say, if you have to choose one, I would say hydrostatic weighing or DEXA. If you had to choose one. I don't like BIA at all on an individual level. And also, like, the bod pod has issues with it. I would say on an individual, if you had to choose, I'd say hydrostatic weighing or DEXA. Will at least probably give you a little bit more consistency over time. Even there, though, you just have to be careful, because I've heard people say, like, oh, well, as long as you just use the same method over time, it should be okay, right? And I'm like, well, no. And the reason is because even DEXA and hydrostatic weighing, they make assumptions about, like, how much water content there is in your fat-free mass and stuff. And the problem is that when you lose weight or gain weight over time, the water content of your fat-free mass, in fact, changes, which changes the assumptions that the tests you're doing based on. And so there's even research studies that have looked at people using the same technique over time and have found inaccuracies in assessing change. And so even using the same technique over time can have problems. And I've seen it firsthand. I've seen it particularly in clients with obesity. I've seen people who visibly have, like, their measurements have gone down, their strength has gone up, they've lost weight, they're feeling better, everything, and yet the BIA shows their body fat percentage going up. But we're using the same technique over time, right? So I just want people to be aware of, just because you're using the same technique over time doesn't mean there's not going to be errors still, But if you had to choose, I'd say hydrostatic weighing or DEXA is probably the way to go. So,
what is your opinion on the skinfolds? Because I know this sometimes might be a technique that is more accessible and more practical, but it might obviously incur a lot of human error as well.
Yeah, I'd say if you're going to do skinfolds actually can actually work reasonably well if you're using the same, if the same person is doing it over time and they have a very good technique. Now, the thing is, if you are gonna do skin folds, I'd say don't even worry about what the body fat percentage is. All that matters is, are the skin folds going down over time? If they're going down over time, then you know you're good. So, again, I wouldn't really pay attention to the actual numbers as far as body fat percentage, but if the thicknesses, the skin fold thicknesses are going down over time, and you've got someone doing it who has a fairly reliable technique, then I think skin folds can be okay, you know, as a technique for assessing change over time.
When it comes to fat loss, can you just exercise without changing your diet to get very lean? What is your stance on that?
I mean, technically you can, but most people are not going to be successful with that, simply because you have to do a pretty high volume of exercise to do that. The average person is not going to do enough exercise to make a significant impact, you know, assuming that they make no changes in their diet, to really make a dramatic impact on their body composition. Now, I'm not saying exercise is not important. I mean, it is. We know it's important for fat-free mass retention and things like that. And we know it's particularly important for long-term weight loss maintenance. In fact, it's pretty critical for long-term weight loss maintenance. But is someone going to change their body comp with exercise alone? Vast majority of people aren't going to. You're going to get more bang for your buck making changes in your diet, you know.
Do you think that probably is because there might be some level of compensation if you exercise way too much, or like you're exercising an excessive amount of volume, training, intensity, or very long period of intense sessions, that might create some level of compensation over time? Like you're compensating somehow, you get hungrier, or you feel like you deserve to eat more because your training session was harder?
I think for some people, probably. I mean, the data suggests that usually the compensation is incomplete, though. So you don't completely compensate for it. I think more what happens is, well, I think some people that compensate it, I think it's more of a psychological attitude. They kind of, well, hey, they don't understand that it's really easy to wipe out, you know, 300, 400 calories of energy expenditure with exercise with just a donut or two, you know, or whatever, you know. So they don't really understand how easy it is to, I mean, you can down a donut in a minute or two, you know, and, you know, and it took you an hour of exercise to expend that energy. So, and I think some people don't really understand that. I also think for some people, especially if they do a lot of exercise, there could be compensation in terms of NEAT or physical activity outside of their exercise. So they're just really tired, and so they just end up sitting around the rest of the day. So they kind of cancel out that energy expenditure benefit. Or again, they have the attitude that they're like, oh, hey, I did my exercise, you know, I can just sit around. So I do think you can get compensatory behaviors in some fashion, and in some instances at least.
Now that you mentioned about NEAT, how important is NEAT when it comes to changing your body composition? Is this concept underrated or overrated?
I think it's underrated. I think way too many people, they get so focused on exercise. Even fitness professionals, they get really focused on what their clients are doing with them in the gym, and not realizing what your clients are doing the other 23 hours that you don't see them matters just as much, if not more, because the amount of energy you expend just through activities of daily living really adds up over a day. And there's, you know, plenty of data on this, both animal data and human data, showing that NEAT seems to play a pretty big role in weight regulation and body fat regulation. And so I think it's very underappreciated by a lot of people. I mean, I remember some years back, I mean, I didn't even know about NEAT. I didn't even know about it, you know, until I kind of learned about it, and then I found out, you know, how important it was. So
in saying that, what would be your stance on these 10,000 steps a day? Is there a magic number that we should be looking at, or is there research to suggest that 10,000 steps is like a good standard practice to get active enough?
There is data suggests that 10,000 step level is fairly good for at least weight loss maintenance. It seems to be a fairly good threshold, approximately. There is some data backing it. It's going to really depend on the person and the situation, but I would say there's sufficient data to suggest 10,000 a day is a fairly reasonable target from a long-term weight maintenance perspective.
What would you suggest to someone who perhaps is underdoing it, like is perhaps 5,000 steps a day or 3,000 steps a day, and they want to change the body composition, but obviously they might have certain challenges or barriers to actually get up to 10,000 steps a day? What would be some ways that you can increase your energy expenditure to allow for that higher calorie expenditure as well?
Again, it's going to depend on the person and the situation, but obviously it's really hard for someone to just go from 5,000 to 10,000. So someone's in a situation like that, I try to increment them up. If they're at 5,000, I say, hey, let's see if we can do 6,000 or something like that. And usually it comes down to just incorporating even like just little walk breaks or something during the day. And it's actually something I used to do for myself when I worked in an office. I would actually take 5-minute breaks every hour and just walk around the building once or twice. Just doing that, I'd accumulate an extra 2,000 or 3,000 steps a day, just doing that. So, I think emphasizing with people that it's not, you don't have to do it all at once. It doesn't need to be done in one thing. It's really about the cumulative activity. And so when you help teach that mentality, I think it can help people learn that, oh, hey, I don't have to go. If someone has a schedule where they can't break out an hour out of their day for a walk, you say, well, hey, can you do 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there and 5 minutes there, to where it adds up to an hour over the day, and that might be doable. So
what would be your stance between utilizing perhaps a steady state cardio or high intensity interval training? Is there any one superior to the other one? What is more effective? What is more efficient?
For a long time, and even I used to think that high intensity interval training was better for fat loss, but the data that's come out over the past 3-4 years has shown that's not really the case. Low intensity, longer duration exercise, in fact, works just as well. So really it just comes down to the individual, what works best for their schedule, what works best for them. For some people, interval training might not work very well because maybe it exhausts them so much that they end up being sedentary the rest of the day, But for other people, maybe they're just, they can't stand long-term steady state cardio. So interval training might be, it's more interesting to them, and they're, maybe they're a little bit more time crunched, and so they can get a little bit more energy expended per unit time. So it just, I think it completely depends on the situation. The data is pretty clear that one is not really superior to the other. So it's really just about using what works best for someone.
Yeah. So would you say that high intensity interval training is overrated?
Yeah, I do think it's overrated. Yeah.
Okay. When it comes to resistance training for increasing your energy expenditure, how important is resistance training when it comes to creating that big deficit at the end of the day?
So here's the deal with resistance training. You don't expend a lot of energy in a resistance training session. It's going to depend on your volume and stuff, but honestly, most people probably only expend maybe around 100 calories or so in a resistance training session, so it's not, you're not a big calorie burning machine during weight training, even if the workout feels really hard. Now, some people say, well, what about the post-exercise energy expenditure and, the elevation in metabolic rate and stuff? You will get an elevation in resting metabolic rate for, 24, 48 hours after a resistance training session. Now, again, it's not huge. You're talking maybe another 100 calories or so, which, I would say if you're trying to lose fat, obviously every little bit counts. But again, it's not like you're going to expend an extra 300-400 calories over 24 hours. So it's a small boost. It's nothing big, but it's still important, I would say. I think the biggest benefit of weight training really just comes down to the maintenance of fat-free mass and muscle during weight loss. I think that's the bigger benefit versus any type of energy expenditure benefit. And again, I'm not saying the energy expenditure benefit doesn't matter. It's just, I think people tend to overestimate the magnitude of the benefit of the energy expenditure benefit of resistance training. So,
in saying that, when you talk about resistance training, utilize that to build muscle or just to maintain what you have, how much of a pound of, like if you gain muscle over time, how much impact has gaining that amount of muscle, like the 50 calories, like that you can burn 50 calories per 1 pound of muscle that you gain? How true or how much is this myth truth in this case?
Yeah, that's completely false. You actually only expend something around maybe 6 calories per pound, 6 to 10 calories or something per pound of muscle. So I know people have this misconception that if you add a bunch of muscle, you're going to become this calorie burning machine. And it's not really true. I mean, like I said, you add 10 pounds of muscle to your frame, which is a significant amount. Your energy expenditure is only going to go up maybe about 60 calories to 100 calories a day. So, it's not going to turn you into some calorie burning machine. Again, now I'm not saying that building muscle isn't important. I think it's very important, but people again tend to overestimate the magnitude of the benefit of the energy expenditure benefit. So,
do you think that it's more like an indirect effect from having more muscle mass in energy expenditure? Maybe not directly in like in your metabolic rate, but perhaps you become more efficient at doing things. You are more you train heavier, you move more, you just feel like you have more stuff to carry. I don't know. It is just like if you find that there is a more indirect effect rather than a direct effect.
Well, I would say this. I'd say one potential benefit is we know that with weight loss, NEAT tends to go down because your body's trying to conserve energy. And there is some evidence that's very preliminary at this point, but that weight training may actually prevent some of that reduction in NEAT. So it may help preserve some of your energy expenditure during weight loss in that sense. Believe it or not, it may actually... It may make you, one of the things that happens with weight loss is you become more efficient in your movement, which means you expend less energy for the same movement. Your body's trying to conserve energy, so it becomes more efficient. But what weight training seems to do is it seems to block that effect so that you don't get that increase in efficiency. And so you don't get that decrease in NEAT. So I was a peer reviewer on a paper that got published on that a couple years back. I don't know where the data is on that. I don't know if anyone's followed up on it or whatever, but it is one potential benefit of weight training is preservation of NEAT. So
I got one more question. I'm trying to find whether you have any updates, any new information regarding spot reduction, or like whether you can target certain spots of your body to change your body composition, like a spot reduction, for example. Is there any update in that data, or are you aware of any? What would be your final words on that? I know that there has been a couple of controversial studies that might show some benefit, but how much of that is true?
Yeah, I would say my final answer on that is it's not really possible. And even if it was, the magnitude of the effects is so tiny that it's pretty much wouldn't make any noticeable difference. So yeah, there was one controversial study that came out a couple years ago. And I remember I reviewed it for my weight research review, and so it's been a while. I don't remember the details, but they had suggested that spot reduction was possible, but if you actually really did more of a deep dive into the study, it didn't really support what they were saying. And their proposed mechanism, if you ran the numbers, suggested that like their proposed mechanism didn't even really make sense. So yeah, I'm pretty much of the attitude that no, you can't do it beyond any type of surgical intervention. You know, there isn't any type of exercise that you can do that's going to be able to target any particular area. It's just a matter, if you want to enhance a particular area, you just got to build muscle in that area and then lose fat all around. And
yeah, James, thank you so much for coming on to the show and having a chat with me and everyone else that was involved watching the questions. If there's any place that you want people to go to, where would that be?
Yeah, a couple places. If you're interested in my research review or just any of my articles, I've got a lot of free articles like on insulin and body comp testing, things like that. You go to weightology.net, WEIGHTOLOGY.net. And if you're interested in the finance side of things, go to fitprofinancial.com. And so those are kind of the two main places you can find me. And then all my social media accounts obviously are on there as well. So
thank you so much for coming. And I was really excited to chat with you and to meet you because we haven't met personally. So that was cool.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.